No superpower collapses first from invasion. It collapses from internal financial strain. History records this pattern repeatedly. Debt accumulates quietly. Power appears intact. Institutions function. Markets operate. Confidence remains. Extreme debt is not an emergency condition. It is a slow structural shift. Obligations grow faster than capacity. Servicing replaces expansion. Maintenance replaces investment. Debt feels manageable for long periods. Costs are deferred. Payments are rolled forward. Risks are distributed. Nothing breaks immediately. This creates a false sense of stability. Leaders interpret continuity as control. Citizens interpret normalcy as safety. External rivals are blamed for pressure that originates internally. Collapse does not begin with failure. It begins with normalization. Borrowing becomes routine. Deficits become policy. Constraints are removed to preserve calm. The critical damage occurs while systems still work, while armies are funded, while administrations expand, while growth statistics remain positive. When strain finally becomes visible, it is already embedded. The breaking point is not a moment. It is a condition reached gradually. Every superpower that carried extreme debt reached this point. The sequence is consistent. The timing varies. The outcome does not. It never has reversed after reaching structural saturation within its financial system once limits were crossed internally first. The late Roman Empire financed its expansion and survival through methods that resembled debt long before modern accounting existed. Direct borrowing was limited, but fiscal pressure was real and persistent. The state expanded military commitments across multiple frontiers. Administrative layers multiplied to manage territory, taxation, and logistics. Productive output did not increase at the same pace. To close the gap, Rome relied on monetary distortion and compulsory extraction. Taxes were raised repeatedly, especially in kind. Land assessments grew heavier. Collection became more aggressive. Compliance was enforced through law rather than consent. Coinage provided the second mechanism. Silver content in the denarius declined gradually over centuries. Under Augustus, purity exceeded 90%. By the 3rd century, silver content fell below 5%. Face value remained. Real value did not. This debasement allowed the empire to meet payroll and procurement obligations without increasing real production. It postponed unrest. It also transferred costs invisibly across society. Inflation followed unevenly. Prices rose faster in urban centers. Rural exchange shifted toward barter. Older coins were hoarded. New issues circulated at a discount. The military remained operational. The bureaucracy expanded further. On paper, authority held. Fiscal exhaustion arrived before political collapse. Revenue extraction reached diminishing returns. Taxpayers abandoned land. Production contracted. The base supporting the state narrowed. Reform attempts came late. Diocletian imposed price controls and currency changes. They failed to restore trust. Credibility had already eroded. The empire did not fall because it lacked soldiers. It fell because it exhausted its internal capacity to fund power. External pressure accelerated decline. The break occurred internally first. Rome fragmented financially before it fractured politically. This internal breakdown reduced strategic flexibility. Resources were allocated to survival, not renewal. Maintenance replaced expansion. Every additional levy weakened compliance. Every debasement reduced confidence. By the 4th century, the imperial system depended on coercion to function. Fiscal collapse was not sudden. It was cumulative. Political collapse merely formalized a failure that finance had already made unavoidable. This sequence demonstrates that Rome's financial limits were breached long before any foreign army delivered a decisive blow. Internal exhaustion determined the outcome before conquest occurred. The British Empire reached superpower status through industrial dominance, maritime control, and global trade integration. Its financial strength was originally a function of production. Manufacturing output expanded rapidly during the 19th century. Exports exceeded imports. Sterling was trusted because it represented tangible capacity. This balance shifted before political decline became visible. By the late 19th century, Britain's industrial growth slowed relative to competitors. Capital increasingly flowed outward rather than being reinvested domestically. Returns from finance rose faster than returns from manufacturing. The economy became more dependent on financial income. The First World War intensified existing strain. Britain suspended the gold standard to finance military operations. Public debt increased sharply between 1914 and 1918. External obligations expanded. Servicing costs became permanent features of fiscal policy. After the war, Britain attempted to restore pre-war monetary discipline. Sterling was returned to gold at the old parity in 1925. The decision imposed deflationary pressure. Industrial competitiveness weakened further. Unemployment rose. Growth stagnated. Debt constrained strategic flexibility. Fiscal resources were allocated to servicing obligations rather than investment. Policy options narrowed. Adjustment costs were pushed onto domestic industry and labor. In 1931, Britain abandoned gold convertibility permanently. This decision marked a structural loss of confidence. Sterling's reserve role declined gradually, not suddenly. Usage persisted through inertia, not strength. Importantly, reserve currency decline preceded imperial retreat. Administrative control and geopolitical influence remained after monetary primacy weakened. The empire continued to function while its financial foundation eroded. Britain did not lose superpower status through decisive defeat. It lost it through obligation overload. War accelerated the process. Debt determined the outcome. Monetary decline arrived before political dissolution. This pattern was visible decades before formal decolonization. Financial strain altered priorities quietly. Defense commitments were reduced selectively. Investment lagged behind maintenance. Borrowing bridged gaps temporarily. Each extension increased dependence. Confidence did not collapse at once. It thinned gradually. By the time recognition occurred, adjustment was no longer possible. Britain transitioned from issuer to participant within a system it once anchored. The shift reflected accumulated obligations rather than sudden failure, and confirmed the sequence observed in prior monetary declines across historical cases. The Soviet Union did not collapse from sudden political revolt or external attack. It collapsed after prolonged economic insolvency that had been concealed by state controls. The Soviet system limited visible debt through centralized planning. Markets were suppressed, prices were administered, losses were absorbed internally rather than disclosed. This delayed recognition, not consequence. Military expenditure consumed a disproportionate share of output. Global commitments expanded across Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. The arms race imposed continuous strain. Civilian production lagged. Productivity growth stagnated. Energy exports masked weakness. Oil and gas revenues substituted for efficiency. When commodity prices fell in the 1980s, the buffer disappeared. Foreign currency shortages followed. The state relied on implicit debt. Enterprises operated at chronic loss. Subsidies replaced profit. Resources were reallocated administratively to prevent failure. This created hidden liabilities across the system. External borrowing increased quietly during the 1970s and 1980s. Hard currency obligations accumulated. Servicing costs rose. Export capacity did not keep pace. Official statistics reported stability. Shortages increased. Infrastructure deteriorated. Investment declined. Consumption was sustained through rationing rather than growth. Political authority remained intact while economic capacity eroded. The system appeared stable to observers. Internal confidence weakened first. Reforms were attempted after insolvency was entrenched. When fiscal reality became visible, adjustment was impossible. The state could not meet obligations without dismantling control mechanisms. Political legitimacy collapsed after economic failure was already irreversible. The Soviet Union did not fail because it lacked territory or force. It failed because commitments exceeded capacity for too long. Debt and distortion accumulated beneath the surface. Collapse followed recognition, not cause. Superpowers can appear stable until a moment financial limits are exposed. The Soviet case confirms that concealment delays awareness, not outcome. This pattern is not theoretical. It is empirical. It is derived from repeated historical cases across different political systems and eras. Ideology changes. Structure does not. Superpower debt collapse follows a consistent sequence. Stage 1. Productive expansion. The state produces at scale. Growth is driven by real output. Fiscal capacity expands alongside economic activity. Debt exists, but remains secondary. Stage 2. Strategic overreach. Commitments expand beyond productive growth. Military, administrative, and geopolitical obligations increase. Expansion is justified by prior success. Stage 3. Debt normalization. Borrowing becomes routine. Deficits persist during both growth and contraction. Debt is no longer treated as exceptional. Servicing costs rise quietly. Stage 4. Fiscal substitution. Debt replaces growth as the stabilizing mechanism. Spending is maintained without corresponding output. Monetary distortion, accounting measures, or financial engineering fill gaps. Structural reform is deferred. Stage 5. Political denial. Policy prioritizes stability over adjustment. Warnings are reframed as temporary issues. Responsibility is externalized. Constraints are relaxed to preserve continuity. Stage 6. Confidence fragility. The system becomes sensitive to disruption. Small shocks require large intervention. Markets and institutions depend on ongoing support. Flexibility is lost. Stage 7, systemic break. Adjustment occurs under pressure. Options narrow rapidly. Obligations are restructured explicitly or implicitly. Power contracts. No historical superpower has reversed course after entering late stages. Delay is common. Avoidance is not. Timelines vary. Rome took centuries. Britain took decades. The Soviet Union took years. The order remains consistent. Outcomes are determined by structure, not leadership quality. Competent management may slow progression. It does not change the destination. Debt collapse is not a policy failure. It is a systemic endpoint reached after repeated substitution of obligation for capacity. History records this sequence without exception. Recognition always comes after commitment limits are already exceeded. The United States occupies a position without historical precedent for a peacetime superpower. Federal debt exceeds $38 trillion. This level is not associated with war mobilization or reconstruction. It is structural. Debt is no longer treated as an emergency measure. It is a permanent policy tool. Deficits persist across economic cycles. Borrowing continues during expansion as well as contraction. Servicing costs rise even when interest rates are managed. Fiscal capacity is increasingly allocated to maintenance rather than expansion. Investment competes with obligation. Adjustment is deferred. Financial markets substitute for productive growth. Asset price stability receives priority. Wealth effects are relied upon to support consumption. Output growth does not match financial expansion. Reserve currency status provides insulation. Global demand for dollar-denominated assets absorbs issuance. External adjustment is delayed. This postpones visible strain. Delay does not equal removal. It alters timing. It increases scale. Policy responses increasingly focus on preserving stability. Intervention is normalized. Constraints are relaxed to prevent disruption. Each intervention reduces future flexibility. Structural parallels with prior cases are observable. Financialization is advanced. Debt normalization is entrenched. Political incentives favor continuation. This mapping does not predict collapse. It identifies position within a sequence. History shows that systems can function for extended periods after reaching this stage. Functionality does not imply resilience. Stability does not imply sustainability. The system continues to operate. Institutions remain intact. Markets clear. These conditions also existed in prior superpowers during late stages. Recognition lagged structure. Adjustment followed pressure. Present conditions align with historical patterns without requiring assumptions about timing or outcome. Alignment is sufficient for analysis. Prediction is not required. The record shows that reserve privilege extends duration, not trajectory. Debt changes behavior before it forces resolution. That change is already visible. Late-stage debt systems do not unwind gradually. They accelerate. For long periods, deterioration appears contained. Obligations are rolled forward. Adjustments are postponed. Stability is maintained through intervention. Then compression begins. Changes that once took decades occur within years. Administrative decisions replace market signals. Rules are revised quietly. Standards are lowered incrementally. Confidence does not break evenly. It fractures by sector, by institution, by geography. Some mechanisms adapt early, others persist until support is withdrawn. There is no single collapse moment, no announcement, no decisive event. Degradation occurs through reduced flexibility and narrowing options. The system continues to function, but with altered outcomes. This process is not chaotic. It is procedural. Adjustments are managed. Costs are distributed unevenly. Expectations are recalibrated after the fact. Inevitability does not require urgency language. It follows from structure. Once late-stage debt is normalized, outcomes are constrained. Policy choices shift from expansion to preservation. Preservation has limits. Awareness does not prevent these outcomes. It does not reverse them. It changes positioning. Understanding replaces surprise. Preparation replaces reaction. Observation replaces belief. History does not record rescues of debt-saturated superpowers. It records transitions. Those transitions are quiet, administrative, and uneven. This channel exists to document those patterns as they occur, not for reassurance, not for entertainment, for understanding systems before their names change.